She was only 3 blocks from home. 3 blocks. She had no keys, no phone, no purse. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and a long walk down a quiet street she'd walked 100 times before. Nobody knows exactly what she saw. Nobody knows exactly what she heard. But we know what happened next, and once you do, you will never forget her name. This is a story about a young woman who had everything to live for. A story about a night that should have ended with a hangover and a laugh between friends. But this is also a story about what happens when the system isn't built to catch monsters until it's too late. Until the bodies pile up. Until a grieving mother refuses to grieve quietly. Because out of this murder, out of this unspeakable act of violence in the New Mexico desert, came a law. A federal law. One that now operates in 31 states across America and has helped crack hundreds of cold cases. Katie's Law. Named for a woman who never got the chance to know it existed. But before the law, before the legacy, before any of it, there was a 22-year-old woman named Katie Sepic, walking through the dark, alone, 3 blocks from home. And somewhere out there in the night, something was waiting for her. Las Cruces, New Mexico. September 2003. If you've never been, picture a city caught between 2 worlds. On one side, the desert vast, silent, indifferent. On the other, a college town full of life. Bars, laughter, music spilling out onto sidewalks at midnight. New Mexico State University sits at its center. And in 2003, it's a place where 22-year-old Catherine J. Sepic, everyone called her Katie, was about to begin the next great chapter of her life. MBA program on the horizon. By every account, she was the kind of person who didn't just enter a room, she changed its temperature. She was fiery from the start. She spent her entire life traveling at 90 miles an hour. Dave Sepic, her father. Her friends described her the same way. Sharp, sarcastic, funny in a way that could disarm anyone. Self-deprecating enough to make the whole room laugh, but never losing an ounce of her dignity in the process. You don't always see somebody who is as beautiful as her, but also self-deprecating. She was prepared to be the target of jokes and make fun of herself, and still make everyone laugh. Amy, Katie's friend. She was also deeply in love. For 8 months, she had been dating Joe Bischoff, a charming young man her family genuinely liked. They were building something, talking about a future, even eyeing a ring together. But that summer, cracks had begun to show. Joe was moving hours away to work in his family's business. Katie would soon be consumed by graduate school. The future they'd sketched out together was getting harder to see. So when Labor Day weekend arrived, they made a decision. Set it all aside. Just enjoy themselves. The night of Saturday, September 6th, started like hundreds of nights before it. Katie, Joe, her roommate Tracy, a small group of friends, bars, dancing, drinks. The easy electricity of a late summer night when you're young and alive and don't yet know what the world can do to you. Security cameras at one of the bars captured them holding hands. They looked happy, or close to it. As the bars closed, the group migrated to a house party, 30 to 40 people. The kind of party that exists only between midnight and 4 a.m., loud and loose and reckless. And that's when everything changed. At some point during the house party, Katie saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Her boyfriend, the man who'd been looking at rings with her just weeks earlier, kissing another woman. The argument that followed was witnessed by multiple people, loud, alcohol-fueled, raw. At 3 in the morning, Katie walked out. No keys, no phone, no purse. All of it left behind in her anger and hurt. She just walked out into the New Mexico night. She only lived a few blocks away. She just went out into the night without anything. Joe later claimed he and a friend tried to find her. They drove around, even past her house, but the light in her bedroom was off. So they assumed she'd made it home safely, gone to bed, sleeping it off. They turned around, went back to the party. Joe fell asleep in a chair next to the very woman he'd been kissing. The next morning, Katie's roommate Tracy woke up and noticed something immediately wrong. Katie's car was still parked outside. Her keys, her handbag, her phone, all still there. And Katie's room, untouched, bed not slept in. Tracy called everyone she could think of, hospitals, friends, even the police station. Maybe Katie had been picked up for public intoxication, but the answer was always the same. No. Tracy pressed Joe. Something happened. What was it? He denied any argument, didn't mention the other woman. Eventually, under pressure, he admitted to the argument, but he was dismissive, irritated, said he figured Katie was just trying to teach him a lesson. They filed a missing persons report. When police arrived at the house and began searching the exterior, they found something that made the air turn cold. One of Katie's sandals, on the ground by the back of the house. The window screen at the rear of the home had been torn open. The gravel beneath it was disturbed, dragged-looking, as though something or someone had been pulled across it. Katie hadn't just walked away. Something happened right here, at her own home, 3 blocks from the party. A few hours earlier, while Tracy was still making phone calls, while the missing persons report was still being filed, a couple had gone out hunting east of Las Cruces. They weren't supposed to be there. It was a remote waste site, the kind of place you don't go to by accident. At 11 in the morning, they saw something on the ground. A woman, half-clothed. Her legs had been deliberately spread apart, posed. Her shoulders and her back had been scorched. Tire tracks nearby suggested she had been dropped here by a truck, and the heat of the New Mexico desert, combined with the animals that roam it, had already begun their work. There was a very real chance her body might not have been discovered, or might have decayed to the point that no one could identify the cause of death. Detective Mark Myers. When the missing persons report for 22-year-old Katie Sepic came in just hours later, everything clicked into place. Tracy was asked to come in. She thought they'd found Katie wandering somewhere without her ID. She thought she was going to bring her friend home. When they pulled back the cover on the body bag, Tracy said she didn't recognize the face of the friend she'd known and loved. Whatever had been done to Katie, it had been done with fury and force, and something that went far beyond violence. The autopsy would confirm Katie had been strangled. Liquid had been poured over her shoulders and back and set alight, though the fire had partially extinguished itself. There had been a fierce struggle. DNA, bloody DNA, was recovered from under her fingernails. Her watch and 2 rings she always wore were missing, taken as trophies. And then there was this. Katie's family later revealed something heartbreaking. She had always had a uniquely husky voice. Even as a child, when she tried to scream, almost nothing would come out. No sound, just a breathless, barely audible attempt. She couldn't shout. Her entire life had been the same. Even as a youngster, nothing would emerge. Katie's family. She fought with everything she had. She clawed at her attacker. She left her DNA under his skin. But she couldn't scream. She couldn't call for help. And the desert heard nothing. The investigation immediately focused on Joe Bischoff. And honestly, you could understand why. He'd argued with Katie that night. He'd been seen kissing another woman. He was the last person who admitted to having contact with her. He'd failed to mention the argument to detectives initially. And when investigators asked for a DNA sample, the only person out of nearly 40 people at that party who refused was Joe. "I really didn't care. I kind of felt like I don't care about our relationship very much. I'm not really faithful. Joe Bischoff, police interview. He sobbed in interviews. He said Katie was everything to him. He said he wanted to marry her. Then, in the next breath, he admitted he'd kissed someone else while drunk and barely went looking for her. People at the party said he'd had Katie's phone and handbag on him, yet he called her phone repeatedly the next morning. Was he building an alibi? Within days of her death, he returned to his family home 300 miles away. When investigators asked him to come back for follow-up interviews, he refused, citing his attorney's advice. A camera was placed near Katie's grave to see if he would visit. He never came, not even to her funeral. Over 1,000 people came to that funeral. There were speakers outside the church for those who couldn't get in. Joe was the only person who didn't come. Police even checked the tires of every car parked outside the church, hoping to match them to the tracks near her body. Nothing matched. For months, Joe was the center of their investigation. And then, a bombshell. His DNA was found in Katie's bedroom. Of course it was. They'd been dating for 8 months. They'd shared her bed. When investigators told Joe, he finally relented and provided a sample voluntarily, and it exonerated him completely. I would be hard-pressed not to want to punch him in the throat. He had the opportunity to simply take care of Katie's family, and he chose not to. Detective Mark Myers. Months of investigative time gone, not because Joe was guilty, but because he was scared and selfish and handled grief the worst way possible. Now the detectives had nothing, and someone was still out there, 1,500 miles away, 11 days before Katie was murdered. Green Bay, Wisconsin. A 25-year-old woman had left a bar after a fight with her boyfriend. 2 men forced her into the back of a truck, drove her to a remote farm, strangled her, poured a chemical on her, and set her on fire. She survived. She crawled to a nearby farmhouse, barely alive, with burns on her body and the smell of accelerant still on her skin. She remembered enough about her attackers to help build composite sketches. When those sketches were released, a dairy farm manager recognized them immediately. 2 of his workers, Juan Nadeau, 23, Gregorio Morales, 27. The manager working with police got Gregorio to take a drink from a bottle and then handed that bottle over to investigators. His DNA was matched to the Green Bay victim. Gregorio received 50 years. Juan accepted a plea deal for 70. But when their DNA was run against the evidence in Katie's case, there was no match. It was square zero, not starting over. Square zero. The connection that seemed so promising, 2 eerily similar crimes, months apart, near the same region, turned out to be devastating coincidence. Different monsters, different victims, same method. That's how many predators exist in the dark. Enough that 2 can operate in the same season, in the same general region, and have nothing to do with each other. 9 weeks after Katie was murdered, 9 weeks a knife-wielding man broke into the apartment of 2 New Mexico State students named Leslie and Tracy. They hid in the bathroom and called 911, terrified, whispering. He had been seen before, prowling around outside their building, looking in through their windows at night. Police arrived in time. The man was arrested. His name was Gabriel Ayala, 23 years old. He was charged with aggravated burglary with intent to commit assault. He faced 9 years in prison. The judge, in a decision that still infuriates investigators, granted him bail so he could, quote, get his affairs in order. Gabriel crossed the border into Mexico and disappeared. He stayed gone for 2 years. When he tried to re-enter the United States in 2005, he was caught, convicted of the original burglary. And, because he was now incarcerated, he was required by law to submit a DNA sample. When that sample was run through the system, matched the DNA found at Katie Sepic's crime scene. Authorities in Las Cruces had never heard the name Gabriel Ayala. Nobody in Katie's circle knew him. He wasn't from her world at all. He was a stranger, completely random. A man who crossed paths with a young woman walking home alone at 3 in the morning and made a decision that destroyed everything. His ex-wife, who had filed for divorce after his burglary conviction, came forward with a ring she'd found in his truck. She had no idea it belonged to Katie. Police traced the truck he'd been driving that night. It had been sold, but the new owners still had the original tires. They matched the tracks found next to Katie's body. The evidence was airtight. But Gabriel confessed anyway. He had been leaving his dealer's house to buy cocaine in the early hours of that morning. He said he almost hit her with his truck. He pulled over, offered her a ride. She said no, said she was fine, said she only lived a few blocks away. He drove on, then came back. He saw her standing at the back of her house, trying to get in through the window locked out with no keys. He asked if she was okay. She said she couldn't get inside. And then, he said he just went crazy. He had very little opportunity to meet Katie that evening. If she had left 30 seconds earlier or later, he would never have spotted her. 30 seconds. The difference between life and death measured in 30 seconds. He attacked her, strangled her, loaded her into his truck, and drove east into the desert, where he tried to burn the evidence with the chemical he had used. He took her rings and her watch. He left her there. And then he drove home. Gabriel Ayala was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. The DA, Susana Martinez, who later became the governor of New Mexico, made clear there would be no plea deal, no bartering. She would try this case, and she would not lose. In May 2007, Gabriel entered a guilty plea to all charges. He begged forgiveness. Dave Sepic said he saw regret on his face, but it changed nothing. Gabriel received 69 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2043 after serving at least 30 years. Given the nature of his crimes, that parole seems extraordinarily unlikely. Today, we are rejoicing that we have the person who killed our daughter. We are so incredibly grateful. But Katie's mother, Diane, wasn't finished, because she had done the math, and the math was unbearable. 9 weeks after Katie was murdered, Gabriel had broken into another apartment. He was arrested. If there had been a law requiring DNA collection at the point of arrest, not conviction, his DNA would have been in the system. It would have matched the evidence from Katie's murder within months. Instead, he fled to Mexico for 2 years, and somewhere in those 2 years, investigators would never know if he had hurt anyone else. I realized I had no interest in collecting DNA when arrested to solve my daughter's death. I was determined to see it through because this small action could save thousands of lives. Diane poured herself into research. She found case after case where DNA collected at arrest, not conviction, would have saved lives. She found Chester Dwayne Turner, arrested 21 times in California before anyone collected his DNA. When they finally did, it matched evidence from 12 rape and murder victims. Katie's law was passed in New Mexico in 2006. In 2009, the Senate passed a federal version unanimously. President Obama signed it into law. Today, 31 states operate under Katie's law or an equivalent, requiring DNA collection upon arrest for violent felony offenses. In New Mexico alone, the law prompted the Santa Fe Police Department to reopen 318 cold cases, sending thousands of hair, blood, and clothing samples to the state crime lab. Rape cases solved. Murder cases cracked. Innocent people cleared. Although we may never meet the people Katie's law has saved, knowing they exist is what keeps us going. Katie Sepic, would have been 26 years old on the day her killer was charged. She would have had her MBA. She would have been loud and funny and fiery and unstoppable. She would have had a family, maybe. And she would have walked through the world taking up exactly as much space as she deserved. Instead, a family who loved her channeled every ounce of their grief into a law that has quietly, invisibly saved lives that will never know her name. Caroline, her little sister just 9 years old when Katie died, described what it was like in the years that followed. My visual memories of my life right after my sister died are really crisp and clear, but they're not vibrant. It's as though this incredibly bright light of love has simply vanished. And Diane, who spent years in the machinery of grief and legislation and loss, arrived eventually at this. Avoid looking back and wondering, what if? Face what is. Make an effort to alter what you can. Katie couldn't scream, but her mother could, and the whole country heard it.